April 22, 2026. We are in the 5th year, and this is day 58 since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Welcome to the Situation Report. In today's report, we will look at a lot of things. We will look at Tuapse and also the aftermath. We will also look at attacks along the entire front on both sides. And what we will also look at are, of course, some very, very strange statements from the Russian side. As always, I won't promise you too much, but of course, once again, yes, how should I put it? What we hear today is very absurd. Tuapse is still burning, and it's slowly becoming visible what actually remains after such a hit. Residents are now reporting that leaking oil has spread over large parts of the area. Streets are black, house walls are smeared, and yards are completely filthy. Even animals are walking through it and are covered in oil. This has nothing to do with a simple fire in a confined area anymore. It looks like everything from the facility is spreading out throughout the entire city, and especially into the daily lives of the people there and into the environment. So you can see that the problem isn't just the fire itself. The tanks are burning down, yes, but at the same time, the stuff just keeps leaking out and spreading. And that's exactly what you can't just get under control, even if the flames eventually get smaller or go out. According to the residents, the ground and air are so contaminated that they can no longer live in the town, and the city was more or less destroyed along with it, even though the Ukrainians didn't hit any civilian residential buildings. If Putin hadn't started the war, their lives wouldn't be so restricted now, but most people don't think that far. Speaking of thinking ahead, now pay attention. If you already found this picture a bit suspicious yesterday because the Russian firefighters couldn't put out the fire anymore and just took pictures of themselves in front of the burning tank, let me show you an even better one. Pay attention, the depot has been on fire for several days now. Large parts have burned out, and we're seeing the aftermath right now. So polluted air, oil, or ash raining down all over the city. So what can the city community do? They thought, hey, the depot is burning down, so of course the city needs more greenery. Huh? That almost seems really absurd. While the consequences of such a hit are felt throughout the city, officials are talking about trees and green spaces that they now want to build on. So they're not talking about what actually happened, but about something that sounds better or is supposed to create a better mood. It's like, there's nothing to see here. Everything's fine. There's no war in Basingse. Of course, in Tuapse. Take a look at this. Russian motorcyclists are riding past a Ukrainian position in the fog and get shot down by the soldiers. How can that be? How can that happen? 3 things basically come to mind that fit the Russian attack pattern. First, as usual, there was no real reconnaissance beforehand. They were simply sent into the area. Second, the enemy was underestimated again. Or third, they knew there were Ukrainian forces but still drove in, just like with almost every attack. Most of the time, it's actually a mix of all 3 things. Basically, Russian reconnaissance hasn't really been the best since the beginning of the war and seems to be treated as more or less optional before an attack. The fact that they now also have communication problems, of course, makes things even more difficult. Here we see another Ukrainian drone attack, this time from above. The Rostov region is quite important because a large part of Russian supplies to the occupied Ukraine goes through here. You can see anti-aircraft fire and explosions from drone strikes in the background. However, the video was only released recently, and that was after I was almost done with my research, which is why I don't have an image of the hit yet. But I will try to provide it as soon as possible, just like I always do. Fighting with low to medium intensity continues in the area around Kupiansk. This affects areas near Petropavlovka, Korylivka, Novosinove, and Pishani, as well as directly in the northeast of Kupiansk. Even Russian forces there mainly rely on small infantry groups and motorized advances. That means they have now reverted to last year's tactics, since those obviously work better. However, these are now regularly stopped or pushed back. At the same time, Ukrainian units are targeting specific Russian positions, including trenches and buildings, which has also been confirmed by some footage. I have to check if I can upload them here due to YouTube regulations. If you see them, then yes. If not, you will see them later on Telegram. What stands out here is not the Frontline movement, but the behavior within Russian units. There are reports that so-called barrier or blocking units are already being used, as they were in the past. They don't attack the enemy directly, but rather their own people in the event of a retreat. Specifically, it is said that such units are used against Russian troops that advance too slowly or fail to carry out orders as expected. And the two main points of contact in this case are here in the northeast and also here in the north. So these are the two main directions of entry where most of the fighting took place. I've also marked them here with these two red pins at this spot and the one red pin up here. In the area of Unkalinki, around Hill 207, low-intensity fighting continues between units of the Russian Third Army, specifically the 6th, 88th, and 123rd, Motorized Rifle Brigade, and Ukrainian forces of the 11th Corps of the Tactical Group Solidar. Among them is also the 10th Mountain Assault Brigade, the 54th, Mechanized Brigade, as well as elements of the 81st Airborne Brigade. On the Ukrainian side, a clear development has emerged in recent weeks. The troops have gradually withdrawn from their forward positions around the Raketin area, which they had held since January, and have shortened the line. The goal was to concentrate forces on the prepared main defensive line of the Kramatorsk agglomeration. This runs along an anti-tank ditch west of Hill 207 and on the western edge of Kalinki. So basically it's shown schematically here. But they didn't want to completely give up the forward area. Ukrainian forces are still holding two advanced positions east of the anti-tank ditch, one at the northern edge of Hill 207 and the other in the so-called forest on the southern flank. These positions are obviously still being used as observation and delaying points, more likely the latter. However, the main focus of the fighting has been for weeks directly on Hill 207. There, Russian units of the 88th Brigade, supported by the 123rd Brigade, captured much of the hilltop forest, with Ukrainian forces now only holding its northern and western areas. Small Russian groups move forward along the Balkans and are now trying to advance toward the village of Oleksandrivka. This is the village at this location where the main attack is directed. The goal is to secure a foothold west of the anti-tank ditch and set up a small bridgehead. This isn't a breakthrough, but a classic approach. First secure the terrain, then exploit gaps, then slowly expand, just like the Russians usually do before. If that fails, they move on to encirclement. Additionally, there are also indications that elements of the 6th Brigade are already present at certain points west of the anti-tank ditch. However, only to a limited extent. The overall picture is that Ukraine has deliberately pulled back and reinforced its line. At the same time, Russia is working its way up to this line, not head-on, but over terrain that allows movement, as I said. This is not a breakthrough, but it's the phase before that. If they can continue to maintain pressure here, and the Ukrainians keep falling back toward the west, overnight into April 22nd, the Zaporizhzhia-Orikhiv marshalling yard was the target of a Russian drone attack. According to Alexei Kuleba, the attack hit the station's infrastructure as well as adjacent facilities. The assistant of a train driver was fatally injured. The train driver was taken to the hospital. Loading stations, warehouses, and parts of the railway were among the facilities affected. The infrastructure as well as facilities of port operators. So this was not an isolated target, but rather the hubs are directly relevant for transport and logistics, and because of that, they are also one of Russia's targets in this war. The Ukrainian Z-blogger Mikhail Svinchuk describes quite openly how foreign fighters are recruited for the war. By the way, he is also the operator behind Rebar. It concerns citizens from African countries. They are being offered, now pay attention, because this is exactly what I said several times in the situation report 2 or even 3 years ago. Because they are promised well-paid jobs in Russia, including expedited visas. After arriving in Moscow, their passports are apparently taken away, and a few days later, they are suddenly told that there is no more work and their visa is invalid. From that point on, it gets interesting because without money, without documents, and without any way to return home, the affected people naturally have only two options: deportation with debts or a contract with the Russian Ministry of Defense. And apparently this contract is signed just like that because due to the language barrier, it is hardly understood. After all, it is in Russian. This doesn't come from some opposing side, but from their own ranks. And that's exactly why this statement carries quite a significant weight. Of course, I have to say, as I mentioned before, 2 or 3 years ago, I often reported in the Situation Report that this is exactly how African citizens are being integrated into Russia's army. And now I have confirmation from a very Kremlin-friendly blogger who describes the procedure almost exactly the same way. That's the one between Zaporizhzhia and Orikhiv. Here's the road. I'll sketch it quickly. It runs here from Zaporizhzhia all the way down to Orikhiv. And this road is now becoming very interesting because on this road, Russian drone attacks on Ukrainian logistics are increasing. The goal is simply to disrupt resupply. Vehicles on this route are being spotted and directly attacked by Russian drones. What stands out is that on these sections, apparently no anti-drone nets have been installed, or at least not everywhere, and that's exactly what makes the route vulnerable. Without protection from above, you're practically exposed to attack on such roads, especially with constant drone activity. That doesn't mean the route is unusable, but it becomes much riskier to use as soon as it becomes a target. Of course, it has to be said that the first, or rather the current drone protection tunnels were built at heavily contested locations or along new defensive positions. The Russians have advanced a few kilometers in recent months, but only in a limited area along the reservoir shore. It was to be expected that there was not a particularly high priority for drone nets here, but now the effects of this prioritization can be seen, especially since it actually partly runs into a new Ukrainian defensive line. After months of back and forth, Viktor Orban has given up his blockade. This clears the way for an EU support package of, hold on tight, 90 billion euros for Ukraine. But it's a loan before the comments fill up again with claims about supposedly giving away money. And even that wouldn't be giving it away because it's also for our security. States don't give away money. It's disappointing that this still needs to be explained to so many. States don't just give out money. States hope to gain some kind of advantage in the near future through this. I'll just call it an investment. And just as an aside, at the same time, a new sanctions package against Russia was launched, though not entirely voluntarily, as there was a deal happening in the background. Ukraine has allowed the operation of the Druzhba pipeline again. That's the pipeline through which Russian oil flows to Hungary and Slovakia. Only after that did he drop his veto. In short, oil is flowing again, the blockade is over, and funds are being released. This leaves a bitter taste since these exports help Russia finance its war. That means steps were taken to ensure that Russia can continue to finance the war. But in return, Hungary gets oil. But in turn, the EU can push through a support package for Ukraine, and at the same time it sends another sanctions package afterwards. The aid package itself is very extensive. About 60 billion, or 2/3, is allocated for military use. The remainder funds government spending to keep Ukraine operational. Because, of course, the war is not only defined by spending at the front. In parallel, of course, there are also new sanctions, meaning less revenue from oil and gas, more banks being removed from international payment systems, and additional restrictions on their ability to act. And with that, I would like to thank all subscribers. Special thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Renicky, Celia Dittick, and Ferdinand Meyerhofer from Alga Crew channel members. Please subscribe, like, comment, and see you in the next Situation Report.